Welcome to Vampire Divorce with attorney Clarke Young.
Welcome back to Vampire Divorce with attorney Clarke Young. Clarke is a seasoned family law attorney, consultant, and expert witness who helps courts and families navigate the realities of high conflict custody cases. I'm Lisa Mosby, and today we're talking about why the phrase high conflict divorce is often the wrong label and how mislabeling protects the abusive parent. Welcome back, Clarke. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
You know, the term high conflict divorce gets used constantly in family court. What assumptions does that label quietly build into how these cases are viewed?
Well, it's an interesting term, and again, it's a misnomer for borderline cases because it's again based on certain assumptions that aren't true in borderline cases. It really assumes that normal high conflict divorces are, people who can get along. They're more or less normal range. They decided to divorce and they're fighting over custody or property or support or whatever. And it gets antagonistic. Sometimes it gets, there's a lot of pain involved. There's a lot of, people's dreams of family have died. It's a death of a dream. And so people, they're in a lot of pain and they're not acting out of their higher selves, so to speak. And so that is considered high conflict divorce in family law. And we're not talking about that. I mean, when when I'm talking about borderline divorces, high conflict divorce is to borderline divorces the same thing as conventional warfare is to nuclear warfare. It's the same thing as dealing with uh, two humans and dealing with a human and a demon or Satan or something completely corrupt. It's just there's a whole order of magnitude or two uh, above what most attorneys consider a high conflict divorce.
So I'm curious, how does this label influence judges, evaluators, and attorneys before any real evidence is ever examined?
It's really a signal. It's a shorthand way of saying I've got a tough divorce here. These people are at each other's throats. They're upset. Somebody's feelings are really hurt. Someone wanted this divorce. Someone didn't want this divorce. It's their lives are changing. They have to, they're moving. I mean, all these stressors are involved, and so people. That's what a high conflict divorce is in most people's minds, including psychologists, because most psychologists don't have a clue about what borderline personality disorder entails and what to even look for. So in in that sense, I hear people saying, "Oh, it's a high conflict divorce," and I just kind of look at them and my eyes, I want to roll and go, "You have no idea. You just don't know." So um, these divorces, well, let me put it this way: most family law attorneys handle somewhere between 20 and 40 cases at a time. You can only do at a maximum, if you've got a good staff, maybe 4 borderline cases at a time. If you are short on staff, you may only be able to do 2 at a time because you will spend every day on 1 or 2 cases and they will keep you busy nights and weekends. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. They are incredibly borderlines can create more problems than any 10 attorneys could ever solve. That's how they're a factory of problem creation and conflict creation.
So, what happens when coercive or destabilizing behavior gets reframed as poor communication in these incompatible personalities?
Well, that happens in every case, by the way. The courts notoriously will sit there and say, you know, can't you two talk? Can't you make decisions? Can't you work together? Maybe we just need to take another 2 or 3 months for you guys to cool off, and then I'll kick this hearing down the road another 4 months, 5 months, and by then maybe you'll have gotten over the emotional part of your divorce. You'll put on your big boy and big girl pants, and you'll just deal with reality. And so when courts talk in those terms, they're talking to they're talking in the wrong universe. I mean, uh, the judges are trying to deal with people who are dealing with reality. They don't understand that when these borderline divorces walk through the door, they're walking into a Twilight Zone episode where everything is upside down, inside out, and ass backwards. I mean, it's all messed up. It's a different universe. So, um, which is probably why so many people love these Marvel movies where, the multiverse and all these freaky things are going on. They, somewhere in their lives, they're resonating with other people around them that are fitting some of these childhood archetypes, if you will. But getting back to your question, when the judges and courts are doing a terrible disservice in these borderline cases, when they talk in normal terms about what it means to communicate or get along or deal with the other person or, grow up or, I don't know what to do with your case. Well, that's because you don't know what to do with the case.
And then how does in a borderline custody case, how does mislabeling shift the responsibility away from the parent driving the conflict?
Well, you touch on a sore point for me. Um, what I see a lot of judges doing, and this is normal range cases as well, not just borderline cases, but especially in borderline cases, they will lean heavily on the normal range parent to make compromises, to work it out with the other parent. Like, I can see you're more patient. I can see you're more mature. I can see you're able to tolerate highly inappropriate behavior. I can see that you are able to navigate difficult situations. So I'm going to fashion this order where I'm going to give both parties equal power, but I'm going to rely upon you, normal range parent, to figure out how to deal with the borderline. Well, that is like throwing gasoline on a fire because the court doesn't understand that the only way you can deal with a borderline is to take 100% of their power away. And they don't want to do that because that looks like they're not following the state statutes and they're not, assuming that it should be 50-50, and they're assuming that the children are going to suffer terribly if they take the power away from the borderline. But they don't understand that by taking the power away from the borderline and getting to the normal range parent, that it then sets up a structure within which the normal range parent can include the borderline even more because they have the ability to say, I'm sorry, you're acting up, you're mistreating the children, you're psychologically maiming them again, you're hurting the children. Bring them home. I'm going to come and get them. We're going to bring them home. And when you're having a good day, when you're not in a borderline flare up where you're just vampiric in your treatment of our children, then, take them, take them as much as you want when you're having a good day. But, I have to be able to have control over what those days are because you don't have any control over how you act. So it's a question of power dynamics, and the courts need to understand that the case is going to devolve to the least common denominator, which is power. You can't go to virtue, you can't go to maturity, you can't go to psychological wellness or spiritual something or other in your decision making. It's all about power because that's where the lowest common denominator is going to be power. And that's why, the dynamic is going to be determined by who holds the power. And as long as you give a borderline 1 iota of power, they will abuse that 1 iota of power. They can't help it. That's why, I'm off topic here a little bit, but that's why borderlines will inevitably and always force an all or nothing outcome. If the normal range parent can afford financially and emotionally to stay in the battle long enough, they will inevitably get 100% power, and they'll get an order that gives them the ability to protect the children because the borderline will force that.
Clark, why does the high conflict framework tend to punish the stable parent more than the abusive one? And can we change that outcome?
Well, the notion that it's a high conflict divorce is again based upon the assumption that you have basically normal range people. So when that's not the case, the idea of if you keep talking in terms of high conflict divorce, you're really using the language, and there's all these assumptions built in that people need to go to co-counseling together, marriage and family therapy, anger management, a parenting class, all these different things that they order you to do, but they don't treat the actual cause of the problem. They're not even treating the symptoms of the cause of the problem. They're just going down a checklist that somebody somewhere decided the parties need to go through in order for the court to get to the end of the process, which is a judgment of divorce, and maybe you'll go away and won't come back again. So there's so much um, baggage built into the term high conflict divorce that it doesn't apply to borderline cases, period. It's just, they need a new vocabulary.
Yeah. And that word continues to be used and it doesn't get thrown out. So we still have to address that at some point to figure out how do we move forward with this? And how does this label affect children, particularly when their lived experience contradicts the court's assumptions about shared blame?
Well, yeah, and again, it's the same dynamic. It's um, how do you educate a judge to understand that this is not a garden variety conflict? And so, as long as the court's going to keep using this language with all the built-in assumptions and keeps checking the wrong boxes, uh, you're going to see the children and the normal range parent and other people that are in the family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everybody is going to continue to pay the price. And the price they're paying is, frankly, their peace of mind, their sanity, uh, the financial future of the entire family. Um, you know, even if you have, they've done studies that have shown that if that it takes 3 generations of people working very hard, going to therapy, getting the help they need to actually eradicate the borderline from the borderline dynamic from the family, because this is generational. It gets handed down generational from usually you know from this. Well, it's always the same sex as the parent. The child of the same sex as the borderline parent is going to be imprinted with borderline personality disorder. So it's a man, the boys. If it's a woman, it'll be the girls. And as we've talked about before, 80% of borderlines are women, whereas the Siamese twin of narcissists, 70% of narcissists are men. And that's a whole different discussion about narcissism. But in the borderline universe, 80% women are going to be the borderlines. And so you're going to get more and more and more daughters and grandchildren and great granddaughters all being imprinted with the borderline imprint, which means this is just a societal problem that gets bigger and bigger every generation. Uh, as Dr. Nathan Schwartz-Salant said, it's actually epidemic in our country right now. So going back to your question, um, you know, the whole family and everybody in the family is going to keep paying the price for having a borderline in the family, as long as the court system keeps pigeonholing it as a normal range divorce rather than dealing with it for what it is. And we've just talked before about what you have to do to get the court to realize that you have to step out of the normal world you've been trained in, educated in, to deal with these cases.
Clarke, where I want to wrap this up today is to take everything that you've shared with us, and for parents trapped under the high conflict label, what's important for them to understand about how long it takes for the truth to surface in these cases?
Hmm. Well, we've hinted at that before, and really, this is where the hero's journey starts. As I said before, they have to know that it's going to take probably a year and a half to maybe 2 years for the court to get for the light to go on. They're going to have to be able to spend most of their life savings, depending upon how wealthy they are. But these are high net worth individuals only who can afford these kinds of divorces. Everybody else, I'm sorry, it's a pay to play game. And if you can't pay, you're SOL. Then they have to be able to endure it, not just financially, but they have to have enough endurance, psychological resilience, fortitude, you name, make a whole list of virtues. They've got to have them all in order to get through this, because they're the only thing that stands between their children and their children's doom. And that's not an exaggeration.
And we'll leave it there for today, folks. That's it for today's episode of Vampire Divorce. To learn more about Clarke Young's work as a family law attorney, consultant, and expert witness in high conflict custody cases, visit clarkeyoung.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, leave a review, and subscribe to the show so that you don't miss the next one. And we'll see you there.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.